When I got to Atlanta, it was a completely new city. I don't know the city. The first thing I did was, go to an art store, and I found this huge, beautiful roll of watercolor paper, and it was 3.5 feet wide and 20 feet long. So then I'm just going to start a big scroll, of a drawing that I could work. And that's basically what I started doing. We just cut a big piece of it and tape it to the wall and just start drawing from it. Not planning anything, just doing this panoramic piece, working on cityscapes that dealt with the city of Tijuana. Do the windows and the doors, and just added little graffiti and lettering that I would see from Tijuana, or at least that I would make up, trying to recreate what I would remember. I was probably just homesick. But also I would go to Atlanta and just look at the city there to find little details that would inspire me, and I could go back to my studio and recreate them. Time progressed, and I was doing these windows and doors, and at some point, the figure started screaming at me. He wanted to come into the drawing. I started with a face, and then once I did the face, my imagination started going wild and started adding parts to it. A hand here and a torso there, and things that I would find in newspaper and glamour magazines. This huge geometric pattern enclosing these figures being trapped by this claustrophobic geometric cityscape. The cityscape that I was developing was determining where the figures were going to be. And out of that, a narrative started coming in. These are the people that are living, in the city, be it Tijuana or be it Atlanta or be it any city. Once I finished, that section, I had something determined. I had this big city part on top, and I knew from then on the drawing's going to go down with the same pattern of working, developing the geometric pattern first, and then continuing with the figures being trapped in it. I was taking ideas from urban landscape, these huge billboards, and there are all these, rectangles and squares, and there's huge faces and figures and bodies. These figures can be advertising for this urban landscape that I'm inventing. At this point, there was the news story about after the bombings in England, the police shot a Brazilian person who panicked and ran, and they shot him down thinking that he was a terrorist. You hear all those things, and you hear about the war in Iraq and the deaths. Those thoughts and those news all start affecting you at some point. So then I began stepping away from the idea that these figures are just advertising in the cityscape, and that these are the actual citizens of this urban landscape, and that they're menaced. People who live in a city face different dangers, being harassed, being pushed, being tortured by some authority, an undetermined authority in this claustrophobic environment. Here you find this person has a gun to his head, and this figure is pressing into this other figure, and the feet had started pressing and stepping on somebody. Those details keep developing into something else, and this narrative starts evolving. Once I finished the cluster of figures on the right side, I needed to step away from that for a while and move to the next part of the drawing. So then I started developing this side. I drew this face, and to me, I went back to imagery that I had seen in Tijuana. And at first, I thought about this child figure sort of like lifting his hand and trying to reach, for help or for comfort. The figure, to me, it started looking like imagery that I had seen in imagery of saints asking or begging or contemplating something. I thought of figures of santos that they carve on wood in Mexico. So I decided to incorporate this wooden hand to this figure, like a prosthetic arm, but it would be, in wood, and it has the same, posture of, saintly figures. I determined that there was going to be this figure to the side. Then I decided to push this figure, behind this hand that was caressing this head, proving of what this figure is doing. It's just ideas that keep, evolving. It's just letting myself be influenced by the drawing itself. That's what happens with figurative work. You draw one figure on a sheet of paper, and by itself, it can be a portrait or just, a figure in an existential void. But the moment you add another figure to it, then there's an interaction, there's a conversation. And that's the way usually I work. I was continuing the same grid and just continued the lines down. And as I was doing that, it seemed to me like imprisoning something. So then I started drawing a figure behind it, sort of, laughing, but also sort of screaming at it being trapped. Atlanta is very industrial, so it has a lot of these huge brick buildings, industry, and it has huge, signage. Coca-Cola has its center there. So it has this beautiful grid that sustains all the curved letters of Coca-Cola. Walking behind these, I would see this grid and I just loved it. So I decided that as a background I would do these curves, these curved lines, and that could be text. The idea of rótulos, hand-painted signage that you see a lot in Tijuana. They're beautiful, handmade, and they're not perfect, but that's what gives it its charm. This piece doesn't have many entries to it where you can, look into a landscape, but it does have little vignettes. It has little sections where you can actually see into it, and you can see a little street that goes down there, and you can see little buildings in the background with little details that you could only see unless you get really close to the drawing. I just started adding more faces that would be trapped with the signage. I drew this hand that was coming out of, from the bottom, and it had this cigarette with the idea of, we could either be burning it or attempting to burn it. I decided to draw this hand taking care of this wounded head, closing this very difficult section of the drawing where it had this oppression and this violence. Walking around Atlanta, there's all these air conditioners all over the facades of buildings. This whole drawing is this facade of a building, and it has this old air conditioning unit that sort of has the same elements of the aesthetic of the grid. To the left side of the drawing, this idea of flooring, something that would break the vertical lines that were in the drawing and add a horizontal plane that would give it this third dimension as a base to this whole structure. The figure that I did to the left was this girl sitting. I started with the legs, the skirt, and continued up towards the face. I decided, just to leave this area of drawing just white. There are times that, that I loved leaving areas white. Well, it breaks the illusion of this being a certain reality. And it just goes back to showing you that this is a drawing, that this is something that's being done on 2 dimensions on a piece of paper. I needed to start thinking about closing the drawing. I decided to do another piece of signage, big letters, sort of the idea of a title for the drawing. When you work on something for almost a year, all these ideas have been creeping up into the drawing, and all these experiences have been happening as I progress in the drawing. So there's no one subject that this drawing is about. It's more about this whole range of experiences or impressions or dreams or wishes that I have throughout this whole year of working. I knew there was not one phrase or one thing that could define the drawing. But I wanted to put a word in that would relate to the rest of the drawing, to the signage that I had already done. I thought about the word rent in Spanish, rento. Renting space, renting advertising space as part of the facade of the drawing. But then also playing with the words. I added MI in the beginning of those words. So then it's mi rento. And then the phrase came to me of saying, miren todos. Everybody look. Look at this. Look at all the drawing. This is a whole year's work, a year of ideas that I've had. And it's something that invites the viewer to look at all this. The end of the drawing just finished with this portrait. This face pretty much just looking out, defiant style. And I did.